the people that would come to our home, and Friday night dinners was like our big thing, and we had these huge crowds, and I would bake up a storm, cook up a storm, but like the thing that really spoke to people, and particularly the women, was the challah. Like their eyes would just pop out of their head, like, how do you make that?
Welcome to Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Chana Weisberg, host of this podcast. Joining me today, we have an incredible guest. Her name is Rachi Pinson. Welcome, Rachi.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is fun.
Thank you so much for joining us. Rachi is a challah expert, or she calls herself the challah whisperer. Is that correct?
I have been
Yeah.
called. I don't think
You have been
I don't
called.
think I gave
Okay.
myself that name, but yes.
Okay.
It's
She's also
happened.
you're also the author of a book on challah called Rise. What an appropriate name for
Yes,
challah.
yes, The Rising Life
The Rising Life.
and the cookbooks. Yeah.
And the cookbooks,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So, and also a cookbook for children. I understand that children
Yeah.
could be part of this adventure of rising
Yeah, that's my
and
new
making
baby.
challah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so tell us how it all started, Rachi. How did you get involved in challah? Was this always like a favorite of yours? Did you always love baking? Did you always make challah?
So not. It's so funny to me still after all these years that that's always the first assumption is that,
Right,
oh, you've been doing this all your life and you loved
right.
it. You love being in the kitchen. I guess people who write cookbooks maybe generally do. But I did
Mhm.
not come to the cookbook writing from the traditional route. So I definitely came to it from a different direction and not so much from the kitchen direction. I wrote a very highly specific cookbook about challah, and it was not something I ever thought was going to happen. Um, I did not even know that challah could be made at home growing
Mm.
up. So I
You make it at home, of course. You go to the bakery, right?
it grows in the bakery. That's where
Of
it came from.
course.
The irony of that is that every other thing that entered my home growing up was absolutely homemade. And
Mm.
that's, I mean, down to the cheese that we actually went to the farm to milk the cow. And then my mother would make that into cheese because we grew up.
Why? Why is that?
No, it was not a health thing. My parents are shluchim of the Rebbe in Vancouver, British Columbia. So that
Mhm.
is where I was born and raised. And growing up, there was really absolutely nothing in the way of kosher. Canada in general had very little, but we're Western Canada, all the way on the other side. And we were like the forgotten part of Canada, and there was nothing. Like, absolutely, we were really the only kosher keeping family for a long time until, of course, the community started to build up.
Wow.
So in my
So
early
which
days,
part of British Columbia? Vancouver?
Vancouver, Vancouver,
Vancouver,
yeah.
right.
Have you been?
Wow. I was,
Yeah,
yeah. It was
it's
beautiful,
beautiful.
beautiful
It's a
place. I was
beautiful
there a few
city.
times, yeah.
It's like, when you grow up somewhere and you think that's regular, and then you start traveling the world and you're like, "Oh, wow, it's really pretty where I grew up." So, yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, I kind of took the mountains and the ocean for granted growing up, but, um, yeah, so we really didn't have anything in the way of kashrus, of kosher food, and everything had to be homemade. And the only thing we had was a very little tiny hole in the wall bakery,
Mm.
started by, some Holocaust survivors. And they sold one thing and one thing only, and it was challah. Um, and this was a tremendous blessing for my mom, actually. I mean, not only because there was actually one thing she didn't have to make from scratch, but because she did not think that she could make challah.
Oh.
She tried early in her marriage. She tried making challah, and it was an epic fail, and I think it involved her
Oh.
mother-in-law, and she still
Oh.
doesn't like to talk about it. My father says
Oh.
it was actually so bad that they put it out on the fire escape, which, de facto porch in their Brooklyn apartment. And the Brooklyn birds would not eat that bread. It was
Eat it.
so
Oh
bad.
my gosh,
So yeah,
really?
so she
Wow.
just decided she does, like, her and yeast, they don't
Never again.
mix.
Right.
She's not doing it. It's not for her. And then, God was very, very kind to her and she had to make everything else, but she got away without making
Bacala.
challah. So growing up, I did not even ever experience homemade, and there was no one in our community who made challah from scratch either. So it really wasn't something I ever experienced. Yeah.
Does your mother make challah today after you made all your cookbooks?
Yes.
Yes,
She
okay.
got a little shamed into it is what happened because I sort of outed her in my first cookbook. And then she was getting all these phone calls like, "Oh, Mrs. Weinberg, we never realized you never baked challah. You don't know."
Right.
And she was like, "Oh no." So I actually
No.
went in the kitchen with her and we did a little challah baking session. And since then, she makes challah every week and her challah is amazing. So
Did
it's just, it's never too late.
did she discover what she did wrong? What was that mistake? What was that fatal mistake
Oh,
of
I don't
the
know.
dumped challah? No.
It was many years later. I can only guess it was any number of things. I mean, I'm
Mm.
kind of a little bit of a challah doctor. I have my Instagram feed is like all DMs about help. All my
Right.
whole Friday is all the challah SOSs.
Of
It's
course.
not rising. This is not working. What am I doing wrong? So I got pretty good at diagnosing the
Well, I
mistakes.
hope you'll tell us some of those tips afterwards or
Absolutely,
towards the end, yeah.
absolutely, with pleasure.
So how did you get into it? Like, if you came from a home that
Yeah,
your mother did not bake
right.
challah, what prompted you to start baking challah
Yeah.
and write a book?
That's a good question. Um,
Yeah.
so it actually started when I was a newlywed myself
Mhm,
and married to a young Chabad rabbi, of course.
mhm,
And we got a phone call from Chabad headquarters, 770, and they told us that there was a community in Japan, in Kobe, that didn't have a rabbi or rebbitzin at
mhm,
that moment.
mhm.
The old rabbi had left, and the high holidays were approaching, and they were in a panic. So, of course, they called Chabad and, "Can you send us someone?" And my husband had spent a lot of time in the Far East as a single bacher, as a boy doing, the Merkaz shluchas, the traveling shluchas. So, of course, naturally, they called him. And this was a great adventure, for a Chabad newlywed couple. What could be a better honeymoon? So we headed off to Japan for the high holidays, and that was,
So,
yeah,
how long did you think you were gonna stay there for? Was it just, like a short
yeah.
time?
It was a short term thing. It was a short term
Mhm,
thing, kind of like
mhm,
what we call Merkaz shluchas, right? Which is like the
mhm,
sort of
mhm,
temporary
mhm,
shluchas. And so we
mhm,
were just going for then. They actually
mhm.
asked us to move there permanently, and whatever. We could talk about that whole story, but in any case, I get there and it's a couple of days before Rosh Hashanah, and we sit down with the community leaders, the shul president, and a very sweet little community. And we start talking about all the things that we're going to do for the high holidays and how, and of course, I'm so innocent and naive, and I turned to the shul president. I said to him, "So where does one buy the challah in Kobe?" And yes, exactly. So, he looked at me with like this mixture of pity and panic, I think. But he was like, "No, you don't understand. In Kobe, the Rebbitzin makes the challah for the whole community." So yeah, so that's where I started. So I was told that I was going to make challah for everyone for all the holidays.
Oh,
It
wow.
was a lot of challahs. I went into that kitchen and I had no idea. But I proceeded to figure it out. I'm not one to back down from a challenge. Someone once challenged me to write a challah cookbook, so you see where that took me.
Right. Wow.
So yeah, so I proceeded to
Can
figure
can
it
you
out.
give us a can you give us an idea of how many pounds and pounds
Oh
of
my
flour you were
gosh.
working with?
Oh my gosh. Well, the first day I actually made some 50 challahs. So that's got to be
Wow.
about 50 pounds of
Wow.
about 50 pounds of flour. So I was working,
Wow.
it wasn't like I was starting and figuring it out and making one nice little challah. I was like, now I'm going to bake challah for the whole community for all the holidays.
Wow.
And it was an adventure. I was covered head to toe and I was like a human schnitzel. It was just like, it was a disaster, but at the end, I succeeded. The challahs came out
Wow.
really good, and it was just something really special when I fed those challahs to the community. It felt really powerful, like I was sharing something of myself. Like
Mhm.
energetically, it felt different than all of the other things that I made. It was the first time that I did the mitzvah. I
Mm.
I looked it up, and how do I, by the way, this was way pre the internet, and
Right.
this
Sure.
was probably about 30 years ago. So this was I really had to figure this thing out, and
So
but
this was the first time you actually baked
it was
challah
the first time I
that yourself?
ever made
Wow.
challah.
And
Yeah.
and not only for yourself, but for
For
lots and lots of people.
everybody. Yeah,
Incredible.
and,
Wow.
so, yeah, I was like I was hooked. It's like, I love
Right.
this, and I want this to be part of my life. I wanna in
Mm.
building a family, I want my home to smell like this before Shabbat, before the holidays. I want my kids to come home to a house that smells like challah. This is amazing, and just the
Mhm.
power of that mitzvah that I did, like, of taking, separating the piece of dough and making the blessing. I felt so connected to my ancestors and to the tradition. It felt like I was coming into myself as a woman in a different way, and it felt really powerful. And
Mm.
so I committed to doing this. When we
Mm.
went back home to New York, and or Jew York, right, where like there's a kosher bakery on every single corner. And the temptation to buy was real, especially
Right.
in those days when life got really hectic. And thank God started growing our family and my career, and then a community eventually of our own. And I just kept going back into my kitchen every single week, and making the challah, and just connecting to it on a deeper and deeper level. So that's kind of how it
Wow,
started.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
And what gave you the idea to write a book on it and to become the challah
Oh
whisperer
gosh.
and to go into communities?
I say, like, I feel like this is just the trajectory of my life. Is I'm very open to whatever's next.
New way.
And
Right.
it's not like I have the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan. I didn't sit down with a guidance counselor and they said, like, oh,
Mhm.
you should consider a career in challah. I did not think there was no such thing as a career in challah. I still don't think this is a thing. But, it just kind of one thing led to the next. It was a beautiful organic progression. So my husband and I started a community in downtown Brooklyn, some 7 years after our marriage, after that whole Kobe story.
Mm.
And it's a very secular, liberal pocket, little bubble of this world in, South Park Slope, Brooklyn. And the women that, the people that would come to our home, and Friday night dinners was like our big thing. And we had these huge crowds, and I would bake up a storm, cook up a storm. But like the thing that really spoke to people, and particularly the women, was the challah. Like
Mm.
their eyes would just pop out of their head. Like, how do you make that? How does one do such a thing? And like, these are people who didn't even know how to turn on their oven. Um,
Wow.
so I would invite them into my kitchen and say, Thursday I make challah, come and bake it with me. And it was such a beautiful opportunity to teach them so much about what it means to be a Jewish woman, and just the deeper meanings behind Judaism. And it kind of just took on a life of its own. And this was pre the whole challah bake and mega challah bake thing. And, there was no one was like doing any challah bake things. And the people who
What
would come for nothing else, but they would come to make challah. And,
why do you think that is? Why do you think it resonates so
mm,
much with so many people?
particularly women. And I think, although these days I see both genders being very into it, but I really did think that I still think it speaks to the woman very powerfully, because I think at our core, we are nurturers.
Mm.
We are the feeders of creation. We take the
Mm.
raw materials of this world and we bring them to life. This is what we do. This is at the core of our biology, it's at the core of our spirit. And I think that this was speaking to women who were living in a man's world. They were raised, the whole generation of feminists who were raised to believe that they can do anything that a man can. And they proved that indeed we
They
can,
could,
and we
right?
can do it faster, and we can do it in high heels, and, with a baby on one hip. But then they were coming to this moment of like, okay, now we know we can, but do we want to? Like,
Mm.
and these women were feeling very, very disconnected from their essence, from their feminine self.
Mm.
And it was part of a larger concept of being disconnected in general from their soul, on a soul level,
Mm.
of
Mm.
being disconnected from their spirit. And this was just such a beautiful way to marry all of these things. And when they would bake challah, there was just like their hands in the dough, and you would just see them light up. Like, you would see them
Mm,
feeling like, "Oh, I'm a woman. Like, hear me
mm,
roar. Like, this is, I am in touch with something I haven't been. Like, I have permission to, like,
mm.
bake bread." And it felt so good for them. And that was, it just became this entry point. And as I would do these classes, and then I had waiting months for, 6 months, a year, because I tried to keep them contained. And then I moved it from my kitchen to our Chabad house, and it's still, so it was so popular, this desire for women to come. And I had I had celebrities coming. I had women coming who they would not show up for Yom Kippur. They would not show up for anything, but to bake challah, they would come. And I felt like it was such a beautiful opportunity to give them a taste of Judaism in a way that they otherwise wouldn't get. And so I kept bringing more material and more material. And then, of course, it's like, when you're looking to buy a car, all you see is that car that you're looking for. When so suddenly I became challah obsessed, and every message in life just resonated with this whole message of challah. And I just kept writing these things down. And at some point it was like, oh, this is a book. I think women can use this. And that's how it started. Then the cookbook was a whole other thing.
Wow. Wow, incredible.
Yeah.
So I'm picturing like hundreds of women with all these lovely manicured
Yeah.
nails in the dough. And what are some like teachings or messages you'd give to them about the challah when you're teaching them that really resonated with them
Mm,
about the power of the challah?
yeah. Oh my gosh, where does one even begin? But
Yeah.
yeah, um, it's interesting. And the messages have shifted over the years. It's interesting depending on who the audience is, because I think challah speaks to so many levels of who we
Mm,
are, as one of the three mitzvot of the woman. So it speaks so powerfully to who we are as women. But then even um, on a macro level, just the fact that as women we are translating the service of the priests in the temple into
mm,
our work in the home, into building a home and a family. So we're kind of the we're carrying on the we're carrying this torch of Jewish survival, through our
mm.
bodies, through our being, through the homes we create and the families we create, and how these practices enable us to keep this alive. And how it's not the big ceremonial occurrences that are what survives. It's those little quiet traditions that happen in the home that we pass on from mother to daughter to granddaughter. Like, this essentially is what survives. Can I share a story?
Of
Yeah.
course, sure.
Okay. So there's a beautiful story. I met a woman on one of my challah travels. So once I wrote the challah cookbook, and now both two cookbooks, um, I started getting phone calls, can you come and lead this challah bake at that challah bake? And then started taking me around the world. So it's been a great adventure. And a few years ago, my challah travels took me to Marbella, Spain. And I
Mm,
was doing a challah bake there. And I met a woman who grew up in a small town between um, Marbella and Cordoba. So there's this little town called Lucena. So I had never heard of it before. But as it turns out, this city was actually very well known. It was once, I'm talking, 900 years ago, 1,000 years ago, this was an entirely Jewish city. So
mm,
not only, I mean, we had incredible presence in Spain, the Jewish people. We had over 1,000 years of history in Spain, and it's fascinating if anyone ever has a chance to tour Spain with a knowledgeable guide. I mean, it's absolutely endlessly fascinating. Since then, I've been there, I think, 3 or 4 times, because it's really incredible what you can discover. But this town of Lucena was an entirely Jewish city. It actually housed the largest yeshiva in the world at that time. Um, and Anna grew up in this town, and she told me that, of course, everyone is Catholic, as is everyone in Spain. Um, the I think we're reading about it this week. This idea that we can learn from everyone, even a thief, right? So we can learn something even from the Inquisition, as horrific as it was. They were very thorough, and
It's true.
when they did a job, yeah,
Sadly,
sadly,
yes.
we can learn from it in a positive way. But there's absolutely no signs of Judaism, and she
Mm,
grew up in this entirely Catholic town, and she said that there was a lot of very interesting customs that she kind of just assumed everybody did because that was all she knew until she left home for the first time. And she went away to college, and it was her first weekend away from home, and she felt very homesick. And
mm,
so she asked her roommate if maybe she'd bake bread with her. She said, "At home, I always bake bread with my mom." So they did. They put together this dough in their dorm room, and when they finished, Anna reached into the bowl and ripped off a piece of dough. And she took off this piece of dough and she threw it into her toaster oven and burnt it. And her roommate thought she lost her mind. She's like, "What did you just do? What is that about?" And she said, "I don't know. Doesn't everybody do
do
that
that.
when they bake
Wow.
bread?" And her roommate said, "No, I really don't think so." So she called her mom. And she said, "Why do we do that thing when we bake bread?" And her mother said, "I have no idea, but I do it because grandma did it. So maybe she knows." So she called her grandmother. And her grandmother said, "I really don't know why I do it, but I used to bake bread with my grandmother. And my grandmother did this. And one time when I was a little
Mm,
girl, I asked her why she does it. And she said to me, 'It's just something the women in our family have always done. So hush,
mm.
don't speak of it to anyone.'" So, um, of course, now Anna's really intrigued, and she Googles, separating piece of dough and burning it. And of course, what does she get? Chabad.org.
Whoa,
And that
wow.
was the beginning of her journey. And she's told me that her mind was just blown. She said, "Why? What is this little simple act that they were willing to risk everything for?" She said, "My great great grandmother,
Mm,
if it was discovered that this was a Jewish practice, she would have been killed. And every generation since, I mean, they would have been at the worst, at the best, severely ostracized and discriminated against. But what prompted them to keep this tradition alive for over 500 years under threat of persecution and worse?" And she said, "They kept it alive for a reason." She said, "I felt like I
mm.
was I was the one they kept it alive for, so that one day, when I would have the freedom to discover this tradition and what it means, I would be able to bring it back to life." And so she was going through the process then of conversion and becoming, going back fully to her Jewish roots. And I think that just speaks to
Speaks
the
volumes. Wow, that's
power
such an incredible
of
story,
what we
really
do. Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
And the keeping to the traditions and how comforting it is. Wow, that's, like,
Yeah.
unbelievable. So it's really like a soul connection that she found because of it,
Yeah.
thanks to the
Yeah, it
challah.
was like they were
That's
creating something that was eternal, that could outlast all the hate and the persecution and I think especially today and since October 7th, I feel like the message has really even shifted, where we used to speak so much about, feeling the connection. I think more and more people are feeling that connection, but the question now more is about how have we survived this? How do we
mhm,
survive this? Will we survive this? And then we look to our ancestors and we look to what has, Vihisha Amda. It's the woman. It's the woman. We say this on Pesach, right? We say this at the Seder. We say that she has stood us strong. And it's, of course, referring to the Torah, but in the feminine because it's the power of the woman. And it's not an accident that Judaism comes through us because through these traditions, we're building something eternal. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. Wow.
Yeah.
It's fascinating because when the world did stop, like during COVID, so many people were also into the
Yes.
bread.
Yeah.
I do you see that as just going back to your roots, going back to what's comfortable, what a comfort level for you? Like, how do you do you see a spiritual significance to the bread itself?
Oh, there's a lot of questions there. I mean, going going to the COVID moment, which was incredible. It's actually what gave birth to my kids' cookbook. Um,
Oh,
so yeah, I was doing all these challah bakes. It was getting really busy. I was traveling a lot, and then of course, everything got canceled. 6 months worth of bookings,
mhm,
and then everyone starts doing these Zoom challah bakes. Like, what can we do to involve
mhm,
everyone when they're in their home so everyone can feel connected? And then of course, we start doing these Zoom challah bakes, and suddenly there is no yeast in the stores because everyone's baking bread, and all these
right.
organizers of these bakes are calling me frantically, is there any substitute for yeast? Is there anything else? I'm like, actually, no. But,
No.
we had to start getting creative. But it was, I think it was, really that idea of we went back home,
Mm,
and society was pushing everyone out of the house for so many years. Just go to work, get out, that what we accomplish, um, and I would say in the male oriented structure, male oriented. When I say that, I don't mean man, I mean this masculine version of reality
archetype.
where it's like you have a to-do list and you check it off, and you get things done, and you can
Mm,
like chart it and graph it, and then you have this feminine aspect of being, which is immeasurable and not
mm,
quantifiable, and um, doesn't have a beginning or an end, and it's this ongoing process, and we kind of lost touch with the value of that, of like the
mhm,
Shabbos reality, which is Malchus, which is being, which is the feminine, that aspect of, can you just be? Which is why
mm,
I always I'll never ask a woman, what does she do? Because I,
mm,
I feel like as much as a woman can do fascinating, amazing things, it's not the essence of who she is. Because as women, it's who we are that is
mm.
the most important thing about us. And I think
And
that's, yeah.
how do you see that as yourself? How are you? Who are you? Who do you feel you are?
Oh gosh, you're asking big questions. So this is
That's my job, right?
lighthearted conversation. I think it's an ongoing process of discovery, to be very
Mhm.
honest. I think, I say we have to live very long lives because we have a lot of work to do to
Mm,
unpack
that's for
all the
sure.
layers of ourself and our psyche, and who are we and what are we supposed to do in this world. And even that is always changing. Um, but I do feel
For
like,
sure.
yes, my message is important, and the
Mhm,
words that I'll share a little story. I sometimes feel like a story will say it better than you can say it otherwise. In my role as a shlucha, as a rebbitzin of a community, you get thrown into this role very young, and
mm.
it's funny because it's been 30 years, well, like 25 years of being in that role, I remember in the beginning, everyone's like, "Oh, you're such a baby," and everyone was older than me, and here they are coming to me for advice, and I'm like, "Really a baby?" And then
Right.
over the years, and then suddenly I'm like, "Oh, everybody's so much younger than me now." So
Right.
it's interesting how that.
Right.
But in the early years,
It's
when
a
when I really was a baby and people were coming to me, and I remember the first person, because you don't forget that, who called me and asked me if she could come over in the evening because she was going through some things, and could I
mhm,
talk to her and, help her? And of course, I was like, oh my gosh, she wants me, like, what do I know? I
mhm.
don't know anything. But of course, I thought about what she was going through, and then I thought about what I'm going to tell her, and I really planned, and it was like a big deal to give someone advice in general.
Advice,
And,
sure.
I sat with her for a long time, and shared what my thoughts were, um and she was like, a wild child in those days, and, partier and all over the place, and getting into things she shouldn't have been getting into, and, getting in trouble, and then she moved to Israel, and I kind of lost touch with her a little bit over the years. And it was probably about 10 years later, and I was at the Kotel with my family. And I heard like someone saying, Rebbitzin, Rachi, like, and I
Mm.
turn around and it was her all these years later. And of course, we catch up. And after we're speaking for a few minutes, she says, do you remember that night that I came over and we had that conversation? And of course, I remembered it. Maybe I don't remember like, all the 20, 30 years of conversations after, but that one I definitely remember.
Yeah.
And I said, yes. And she's like, well, that was the turning point in my journey. Like that's when things started. And because when I
Mm.
saw her now, she was a completely different person. She was
Mm.
wearing a skirt. She looked like she was on a journey. She had become Balas Tshuva. She returned to her Jewish roots. And, you know, you couldn't see any tattoos. I don't know. They were all covered up. So
Wow.
she looked like a completely different person. And she said, this was the beginning of of the turning point. And I was like, wow, what did I say? I'm so curious. I was such a baby. What did I tell you that made such a difference? And she said, no, actually, I don't even remember what you said. So much for all the planning but she said it was the first time that I felt really heard or seen.
Was the way you made her
And she said,
feel.
I felt like I mattered
Wow.
and I felt like what I was going to do now in my life was going to make a difference and it
Mm.
mattered to someone and that's where my journey started back to my roots. So
Mm.
I think when you say like what is it, I think it's like the presence of what we bring, when we come or when I speak or when I share with women. It's not simply the words that you say, of course, different things will resonate with different people, and I always pray that that I should channel what someone needs to
Right.
hear. And sometimes I'll finish speaking and I said, I don't even know why I just spoke about that. And that,
Right.
but I guess someone needed to hear. And then of course someone's going to tell me, someone comes to me and they're like, that's exactly what I needed to hear today.
Right.
And I was like, thank you, Hashem. It's not me. I was just like, whatever has to come through us. But I think it's more than that as a woman when we show up to speak or to share. It's it's the being able to be very present with another person, the
Mm.
compassion, the joy, all of those things are really what speaks to the heart and the soul.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. And I know, so I know you're working on, or you just worked on, a children's version. How can we involve our children?
Yeah.
How can we give them the passion that you're speaking about in in challah baking and being a part of this amazing tradition?
Yeah.
How can we involve them and make them feel excited about it? Especially
Oh my
teenagers,
gosh, make
which, you
challah
know.
with them. That's why I wrote the book. I mean,
Yeah, how do we
that's
do that?
that's
How do we get them excited about it?
whatever we're excited about, they're excited
Mm,
about. And I think it's like
mhm,
you can pay lip service to anything. And now that my children are, thank God, grown up, I see so much the truth of this, that whatever I was passionate about, whatever I was into, whatever made me happy, that's what resonates with them.
mm,
And I think in general, that's the best way to pass the beauty of our traditions to our children, to the future generations, is with the beauty of it, the joy of it. And that's why my books,
mhm,
I mean, I wanted them to be, I happen to be an artist and a graphic designer. That was my career for many years, working,
mm,
in advertising and design. And I wanted to bring that to these books because I said, we want the content that we share to be gorgeous and not just
right,
meaningful spiritually, but also beautiful physically. I mean, we're talking in the Torah now about building the Mishkan, right? And it had to be gorgeous. And all the
mm,
details were so important because this was going to help us connect to something that's transcendent, something that's beyond the physical beauty. But we use that as our access point. So I think when we're giving our children, when we go in the kitchen and we put on the music and we dance and we're joyful and Shabbos is coming and that means we're happy, not that means we're stressed
mhm,
or upset and I can't wait for this to be over so I can get to the rest of my life. But no, the whole week is about Shabbos. And I did this with my children even when they were very little. That I think I wrote about this in my book, this idea that even though you don't really appreciate Shabbos until adulthood. the beauty of Shabbos is in that you can stop doing and just be, and it's so powerful. And it really is
Mm.
like the essence of life itself. But as a child, you don't want to stop, and being told that you can't do something is not always a happy thing
It's
to hear. It
restricting.
can feel
Sure.
restricting. So when I was raising my children, I mean, the thing we used to do is anytime something amazing, a new game, a new toy, or there was a treat, a candy, we'd be like, let's save it for Shabbos. And then
Mhm.
Shabbos would be this time to open things up and have the treats that we wouldn't have during the week. And we never had soda, but Shabbos, they would have like, so it
Right.
was like Shabbos became something that was exciting and they would look forward to. And I think for every age, you can do what's appropriate, but I think there's no age that's too young to start making challah with. And that's really where during COVID when I was doing these challah Zooms. And till then, it was always adults. It was always, mostly women. Sometimes I did
Mm.
couples and mixed crowds, but usually women. But suddenly, I had the whole family in the kitchen. And the kids were
Mhm.
on their stools and, peeking above the counter and getting their hands in the dough. And there was so much joy. And then I was getting these messages that were just amazing that you gave us something now that we can do together. Like, this is the only thing that gets my kids off a screen during COVID. Like, there's
Mhm.
nothing else that I can get them off except to come in the kitchen with me and make challah like that. And so I was like, I think we need a book for the kids. And actually, my
Wow.
little like thing that I snuck in because I like to, it's like how people sneak the veggies into the brownies.
Right.
So I like to like sneak the good stuff into like, it looks just pretty and the recipes, but I'm sneaking all the good stuff in. Um, so I really wanted to I'm very passionate about all the mitzvot of the woman. And I wanted to bring the idea of lighting Shabbat candles to women also.
Mhm.
And how do I do that? Especially the Lubavitcher Rebbe was um, spoke so powerfully about little girls lighting Shabbat candles and bringing back that old tradition of having the young girls light Shabbat candles alongside their mothers. And I wanted to bring that back. So that's the whole book really started with that. I'm like, I'm going to do something beautiful with the candle lighting and then I did also setting the Shabbat table and how, all the meaning of everything that's on our Shabbat table. So it's really about bringing the beauty and experience of Shabbat into the home for the whole family. So that was really the
Wow.
intention of it.
Incredible. So I'm sure some people are watching this right now and thinking, I'm going to start this week. I'm going to do a
Yes,
family
please.
break. I'm going to do something with my family. Give some tips or some ideas of how they can get started.
Okay. That's such a good question. Wow. Okay. Love that. And that's really what I'm all about is demystifying the whole experience. Like if I could have figured it out in Kobe, like with nothing, let me tell you, it's intuitive. It's not, and people tell me, oh, I like to cook, but I can't bake. It's too precise for me. So I don't make challah. I get that all the time. And I always answer, well, challah baking is not cooking and it's not baking. It's a different
Mhm.
experience. It's bread making and it's intuitive. Like if you think about it, women have been baking bread for thousands of years, feeding our family. It's like so deeply embedded. So, not to fear the process and also to understand that it is a process. And most of the mistakes people make when it comes, like the problems people have, is all about not giving it enough time, just not having enough patience,
Mm.
trying to rush the process. As the process, like the magic of the challah is in the process. So, it's just a couple of ingredients. You
Kind of like
It's
life, right?
exactly like life. Thank you. That's
Right.
why I say the recipe for challah is the recipe for life. It really is. And everything, most things, time heals most things. So there's,
Mhm.
flour is the body, water is the soul. Like that's basically all
Mhm.
you need. Um, a little salt, salt content is also very important in our bodies for the balance. And there's just a few ingredients. You need a bowl, maybe a spoon. Could even get away without the spoon. Just use your hands, get in that bowl. You really don't need equipment. You don't need fancy machinery. You need the most basic ingredients and you can put together a challah dough. And um, it's just and whatever recipe you use. Of course, I'm a huge fan of like I really went through every recipe and
Mm.
I have fascinating stories and recipes and all kinds of things in my cookbook. But whichever recipe you use, challah is very forgiving. It's really,
Mm.
it's not a complex. It's not baking something that's exact. It can be a little heavier, a little lighter, a little fluffier, a little denser. It's fine. No one will complain. A homemade challah is a thing of beauty
Delicious.
and delicious, no matter
Right.
what it looks like. So, I just encourage people to go ahead and do it. And it really is something that the more you do, um, the more intuitive it becomes. And it becomes really a very embodied art, just very it's like muscle memory, and the more you do it, it's just the more it's just you don't even think about it. It'll flow through you. And
Mm.
so it's definitely worth going into the kitchen, giving it a shot, and if the first time it doesn't come out amazing, keep at it. DM me. I'm used to all the questions. At Rocky Pinson. Feel free to reach out with any of your questions, and just enjoy the journey, enjoy the process of it, because that's what it's about. It's not about perfection, because if you want perfection, you can go to a bakery, you know. But
Right.
it's not about that. It's about making something that comes from you and our energy and our intention. That's what's going into the dough. That's what your family and your loved ones are going to receive, and that's what it's
Right, that's
about.
beautiful. So I'm imagining, in some of the challah bakes where there was hundreds of women that you were
Yeah,
leading in the most faraway places, which you can tell us after which was your favorite. But I'm just before we get there, like I'm just imagining women together, hundreds of women at times, saying that
yeah.
blessing over the challah. What did it feel like? And was there any memorable moments, especially after October 7th, when women are gathered there saying that blessing? Separating that piece of dough,
Yeah.
and after they made the dough, what was give us a little feeling of what that felt like.
Oh my gosh. I mean, where do I begin? Because I've done hundreds, thank God, at this point, and each one is so special, and just connecting with the women from all over the world, all over our country, um, our continent. I mean, women, it's such a powerful experience to meet Jewish women, and my favorite part always is the actual at the end when everyone comes to get the books, and I'll sign it for them, and I have a few minutes of conversation with each person and get to really connect and see, the beauty of what we share. Um, I just very recently, actually, I took a group of women to Israel for a solidarity mission post October 7th to bake challah with the women who were most affected, by October
Mhm,
7th. And there was this one challah bake in Sderot, which is very close to the border of Gaza. And I think there was probably about, it was a small group, it's a small town. There was maybe about 50 women, but I think 20 of them were widows from
mhm.
October
Wow.
7th. And the Rebbetzin of that community, she warned me before. She's like, listen, I'm going to invite them, but these women, they don't want to leave their house. Some
Mhm,
of them are like really in deep depression. They have really gone through terrible things. And, like, N you never know. Like, I feel bad because 'cause you're schlepping out all the way to the south. You're
mhm,
bringing a group of women, like, I don't even know if they're gonna show up. And I said,
mhm,
"Even if one shows up, that's enough." And we
mhm,
learned that as Chabadniks, right? This is something we're taught early on. Like, it's not about the numbers. Every soul is so precious. I said, "Even if one shows up." And, um, they all showed up. And
mhm.
the
Wow.
Rebbitzin, like, told me then, she said, "This is like a miracle. Like, I can't get them for anything." And some of them showed up and they were like almost like standing at the door. You know when like people are like half
Mhm,
in,
mhm,
half out, like, "What am I doing here? Why am I here? I don't want to be here." Some of them came like really like in their sweatsuits, like they were pulled out of bed, you know?
mhm,
Um, and as the evening wore on, um, you saw everyone just start to soften, and they'd come
mhm,
take a seat, and then they move a little closer to me, and like we ended up having this, like, closing the lights and singing together before we did the hafrasha challah, before we did the separation, and just like connecting so deeply. And these women were just so moved by the experience, by feeling connected again. They were feeling so disconnected. And that's
Mhm.
the biggest pain. I think that the pain
Mhm.
of the universe is that pain of feeling alone and
Alone, right.
disconnected, and that moment of deep connection with each other, and saying the bracha on the challah, and feeling like they were doing something meaningful and powerful, and they could really pray and their prayers would be heard. And it's just, I mean, I can't even tell you the energy in the room after. And there was just so much hugging and tears, and it was just felt so powerful. And they just kept asking, you came for us? Like, you came from America for
Mhm.
us? Like, why? And everybody was
Wow.
just like, because we're one family, because you're not strangers. Like, you're our sisters, and we pray for you every day. You don't even know. And it was just it was an incredible moment. So that's probably one of the most powerful challah events that I've had the honor
Wow.
to lead this
That's really
year.
incredible.
Yeah, yeah,
You're the imagery as you're saying it is all the different parts of the ingredients that we take, the water and the oil, which usually doesn't even connect, and how it's all coming together into that beautiful dough, and how all these women and all the Jewish people are really connecting over it.
yeah,
So that's a beautiful
yeah,
imagery of what it
yeah.
is.
Yeah,
Wow,
I used to talk about,
that's incredible.
when you're scraping and it's funny because one woman who I taught, she was going through a conversion process. Also, she was raised Jewish, but wasn't, halachically Jewish, and was going through a conversion process. And so I was teaching her for a long time, and one of the things we did together was bake challah, and she came along with me to a couple of my challah bakes as my assistant because she wanted to be, and she, learned something new every time. And in the and she wrote me this beautiful letter after she went through her conversion, just to express her gratitude for our journey together. And in the letter, she wrote to me that one thing that touched her the most from what we had learned was something I had said during a challah bake, which was that, all these, like, when you're scraping and I think I actually wrote something to this effect in my book as well, is like, all, like, when you're mixing together the pieces of the recipe, and there's like little bits on the edges that kind of don't want to combine and don't want to mix exactly, and you're like, just, and they feel, it feels lumpy and it feels disconnected in the beginning, and the more you knead and the more you combine, it just comes into this one beautiful cohesive whole, and everything, those who felt themselves on the outskirts and on the edges suddenly can
Mhm.
feel like they are part of a greater whole. And that was something that resonated
Beautiful.
with her also, which was interesting. Yeah.
Wow, beautiful. So, it's interesting from one episode in Kobe, Japan,
Yeah.
this whole movement began with
Yeah.
you of making turned
Who
into
knew?
this
Who
huge
knew?
thing, this huge life purpose,
Yeah.
really. Are there any other future plans for you down the road that you're thinking of?
If you recall, I said I go with the flow. So, um,
Yeah.
and
Whatever
it's so
takes
far,
whatever
it's
brings
been
your
serving
way.
me very well. I think it's just a matter of being open and having trust that whatever is coming into your life is bringing you a message, and Hashem is trying to speak to you
Right,
through whatever's happening in life. So I'm open to whatever's next. I'm definitely still very involved in speaking about mikvah and all the women's mitzvot, and that's very important to me. And who knows where that takes me? And yeah, just gonna
right,
see
100%.
what's in
So
store.
I don't think we could talk about making challah without bringing in sourdough. Do you do sourdough as
Oh
well?
my gosh.
The latest
I
craze.
know. I feel like an imposter these days without having like a active sourdough starter going on in my kitchen.
Right.
I did do it for the cookbook. So I have
Mm,
sourdough recipes in my cookbook, and I did the whole journey to do it legitimately because I
mhm,
didn't want to just write about something that I didn't have experience with. So I went to, a sourdough master and studied with him, and I did the whole thing. And it was a fascinating process, and I learned a lot through it. Um, but it's not. I may revisit it.
mm.
Now, I never say never. I may revisit it. My family loves sourdough. So, they're always and people, I give a lot of challahs, so I get a lot of sourdoughs back. So we have a good exchange
Right.
thing going on. Um, but it's like I feel like people who there's a certain type that connects very much to sourdough, and that these are people who can like keep their plants alive also, which I'm not very good at.
Right.
So it's like
Right.
there's a certain amount of tending to it and
Mhm.
detail oriented that didn't ever stick with me yet. Yet. I say
Right.
yet because we're
Right.
always evolving, so who knows? Maybe that's next.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you think that the regular challah, the traditional challah is more forgiving, easier to do?
No, actually,
No.
like sourdough is pretty much one of the easiest things you could do. It's no,
Right. Yeah.
it's the most uncomplicated bread. I mean, it's a country rustic loaf. It's you almost don't touch
Right.
the dough. You just leave
Right.
it alone. It wasn't the making of the bread so much that was it was more of the like the caring for the starter. That was like
Mm,
having
starter. Right.
another child. Especially in the beginning.
Right.
Maybe if somebody would
Right.
give me and if anyone's listening to this and they wanna gift me with their starter that's, like,
Right.
super hardy, like, I need a super hardy starter, like, one that's, like, been
Right.
around for generations, like, you cannot kill. But yeah.
So call me after. I have someone in my
Oh,
community who
okay,
does it if
okay,
you
there you go, you see?
want. Right.
We'll get something from this.
Wow.
But yeah, otherwise, I was doing the starter from scratch and you had to feed it and
Mhm.
then I would
Mhm.
travel and put it in my fridge, take it out, then try to
Oh,
restart
right.
it.
Sure.
So it was until
Sure.
they're very strong, which is also of course a metaphor for life. Like, the beginning of life is very delicate and fragile and needs a lot of tending. So, you know,
Especially our
especially our
children to make
children.
sure that
So
their
yeah.
experience is
Yeah.
sure.
So
Right.
maybe now that I don't have any small children, yeah,
Right.
I can think about that.
Uh-huh. Okay. Now we can't let you go before you tell us some do's and don'ts of what we should or shouldn't
Okay,
do.
okay. Do you have any questions? Do you want to ask me more specifically, or do you just want me to give you some tips?
Just like what are the things that people make the biggest mistakes with? What are the most common mistakes that people make and how should they avoid
Okay.
them?
So there's very little you can really do to kill a challah. Like it's kind of,
Mhm.
especially if you're using a good recipe. I mean, there's really very little you can do. The few mistakes that people make. Number one is not giving enough time. So you
Mhm.
work with yeast that is not expired. So fresh yeast, when you buy like those cakes of yeast, those are very finicky. And I really thought starting out this journey that of course that's much better than
You would
dry
think that,
yeast, right?
right.
Because everything fresh is
Sure.
better than dry. It's essentially the same thing. They're both commercial active
Ah,
yeast. Just the dry one is more stable. So, I
uh,
highly recommend working with the dry yeast. It'll stay
mhm.
fresh longer. You're much more likely to be working with the other ones, unless you're baking every single week and they're very, they go bad. So work with dry yeast. Um, if you buy a big package, then keep it in your fridge or freezer in a mason jar or something where it's airtight. Um, use warm water, like really warm, not
Mhm.
hot, but like I call it baby bath temperature. So, warmth will encourage the growth. Um,
Mhm.
and even though if you use cold water, it'll still work. Very hot water,
Mm. I didn't know
yeah,
that.
it will work.
Interesting.
It will maybe you will end up with a stickier dough, um, and it might take a little longer to rise, but it'll still work. Um,
Mhm.
but if you use a warm one, it will activate the growth process. It'll activate the yeast faster. Active yeast is active it's called active because it's already active. So
Mm.
people don't know this and they think they have to wait the 10-15 minutes to watch it foaming, but you don't. It's instant, it's active, it's already activated. So you can just make the whole thing all at once. You don't have to wait. So that's
Oh,
something people don't know when they're working with the instant yeast. You don't need to have that proofing time unless you're not sure if your yeast is still active, like if it's been around for a long time, it's
oh,
expired,
okay.
maybe it was so then you might just want to watch, make sure there's some foaming or some bubbling or some kind of action to show you that it's it's still uh,
It's
an
working.
active
Right.
yeast. Don't add too much flour. That's a big one.
Mm.
So people, and I always say, challah is life, and life is messy and sticky, and
Mm.
nature has no perfect edges. And so, there's this temptation to throw a bunch of flour on it to get this like perfect sphere. And then people end up with like, a dry loaf that's very heavy.
Right.
So
Mm.
the the most important, like go easy on the flour. And I'll never give an exact amount. So even if we're using the whole 5 pound bag, I'll say leave out the
Mhm.
last cup or two. Only add it
Mhm.
if absolutely necessary. Use oil on your hands when working with the dough instead of pouring on more flour. Like, try to avoid
Mhm.
using more. Um, Err on the side of sticky. A tacky dough is great. That's, you want it to be a little
Mhm.
tacky. And don't forget that a lot of the issues resolve themselves in the rising process, just like in life. So
Mhm.
once you
Mm.
have all those ingredients in there, like you need a little more, you need a little less, it's okay. If you are working with a machine like a Bosch or a KitchenAid or one of those mixers, I do recommend the Bosch or the Magic Mill. I use the Bosch myself if I'm making a lot of dough, for events, or, I like to do it by hand for my family, but I will use the machine if I'm making, or testing recipes or whatever it is. Um, using a machine, there is a risk of over kneading, which will toughen the
Mhm.
dough. So I
Mhm.
recommend about 4 minutes at high speed, 4.5 minutes, and that'll knead your dough perfectly, and that's all. If you're kneading by hand, you don't have to worry about over kneading. You won't you're not, unless, I don't know, you're a boxer or something and you have crazy powerful arms, but most people won't over knead their dough.
Right. Okay.
And you just stand up when you're kneading, get into it, use the time, put on music. Your energy is going into this food that's going to feed your family. It's going to convert to energy in them, and they're going to receive it the way you make it. So put all that positive, good energy. Even if you have aggression, you have to let out. You can let it out there too. It's fine.
The
The
good
good
part.
stuff. Better let it out on your dough than the people in your house.
Right.
Um, put on good music. Put on a nice podcast from Chabad.org or a Torah class or
Mhm.
something meaningful that you can connect to, and enjoy the process, because that's what it is. And then give it enough time to rise. So,
To rise.
rise it. And then the mistake a lot of people make is that after they braid it, they stick it straight in the oven. So it does need a second rising. After you braid it, you have to let all the air come back into the loaf so that it is full of air when you put it into the oven. So that's a mistake some people make, is that they just braid it and then they're like, oh, it rose already. No, it needs to rise again. Wait till your loaf is really
Mhm.
nice and puffy, and then it goes in the oven. I think those are some good tips.
Right. Okay. Those are great tips. Absolutely. Fantastic. Now, what about if someone wants to actually make the blessing on it? They need to have a certain amount of flour. So, how do you freeze if you have extra? Like, what would you
Okay,
advise
such a
if
good
someone wants to
question.
make? And if you want to make the blessing on it, we have on Chabad.org, just do a
Yes.
search for
They
challah
have
and you can
great,
find
yes,
all the
absolutely.
instructions and the blessings,
Everything's there.
everything,
Everything's there. And I always refer
and the
people,
amounts and the
always
quantities,
refer
all
people to
that. Right.
Chabad.org. It's the absolutely the best resource. Um, and all the laws of it also. And I have in my cookbook actually a compendium of the laws, just like a short version of all the laws. And,
Mm,
and, and I have a chart, like a graph with a visual of how much flour requires separating, how much flour requires separating with a blessing, without a blessing. So all of that is in my cookbook as well, with the blessing, and different meditations and intentions as well. So what I recommend is, if you're listen, if making a full batch is going to be so intimidating that it
mm,
causes you not to make challah, there's so much to the challah making process that goes beyond even the blessing of the separating the dough. It's
mm,
it's it's the it's this it's like our offering. We're serving it at our Shabbat table, which is our altar, and we're transforming the environment of the home, and the home smells like challah. So if making a full 5 pound bag is so intimidating, that much dough to work with, and you just so make a smaller batch. And I gave you in my cookbook, I've divided the recipe so you can sort of choose your own adventure and do a quarter recipe, half recipe, full recipe, and each one has its own instructions. But what I do want to say is, if you are going to choose one time, the time we're recommended to make the blessing and do the blessing is between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's the most powerful time. This time
mm,
of tshuva, of returning and reconnecting, is the most powerful time to do challah. So if you're only going to do it once a year, do it then. If you want it, what the other thing I recommend is do it once a month. If you're a
mm,
family, if you're a small family, or you're just making for yourself, or and you only want to make two challah, the full batch can give you a month's worth of challah, and you can And the way I recommend doing that is actually baking it all and freezing the challahs when they're baked. You
Once they're
can
baked.
also freeze the dough. It
Mhm.
doesn't last terribly long in the freezer. I would say about 3 weeks maximum. The yeast cells
Mhm.
start dying out in the freezing cold.
Mhm.
So um, I wouldn't freeze the dough for longer than 3 weeks. And when you do defrost it, it needs to completely defrost and then rise again. So
Mm.
just a quick instructions: if you're going to freeze your dough, let it rise once completely after you bake it. Take out all the air. You don't want any of that air in there when you're freezing it. That's going to give you a off taste. So get out all the air, and then I recommend dividing the dough into as many. First of all, make the blessing before you freeze it.
Mm.
Always do that before you freeze it, just so that you know that you've done that. Freeze it in individual loaf size and in a Ziploc bag with a little bit of oil in it, so it's easy to take out when you're defrosting. And then when you defrost it, it needs to fully defrost, come to room temp, and rise again before you work with it. Okay, so
Mm.
that's why freezing is like a little. I do recommend freezing the baked loaves as the best option.
Mm.
Putting it back in the oven before serving for about 7 to 10 minutes at 350, and it'll taste like you just baked it. So it's a great trick.
And it will
And
smell
it will
like that
smell like
too,
that.
right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Right.
there's a lot of ways, and I
Wow.
actually have all of these methods, and also slow rise, quick rise, all different methods to make challah baking work in everybody's life, no matter what your own schedule looks like. There's a way you can fit challah baking into it. So I lay that out all in my cookbook.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. I am sure that there are gonna be a lot more people who are making challah this week
Yay!
thanks to this,
Love
podcast,
it.
Raghib.
Love it. That's my
Thank
goal.
you so much for joining
Thank you for
us. I
having
really
me.
appreciate your time. Thank you for all your tips and tricks and your amazing
Thank
stories.
you.
Those were really
Thank
great.
you. It's been a
Thank you so
pleasure. Thanks
much.
for having me on. All right.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Well, that was a great episode, a lot of fun with that one, from Ruchi Pinson. I'm sure you've gotten a lot of practical tips and tricks of how to make your own challah. If you wanna make it this week, I'm sure you'll be much more motivated after watching this podcast. What I loved from this podcast was how she started off with the story from Kobe, Japan, and it was just so incredible how, different circumstances in our life bring us to our life's mission, how this is clearly something that she's so excited and passionate about, but how it started with just that trip to Kobe, Japan, where she was put into a situation which she stood up to, and she actually filled that. She filled it so beautifully, and it's in all our lives, different circumstances and different situations really create who we become. I love the story that she told with that young woman as well, who just had this tradition that was passed down to her from her mother, grandmother, grandparents of separating that challah and saying and then burning it in her toaster, and how she really discovered so much about her traditions and her past just by exploring and just by being open to that opportunity to understanding what it was that her past explained about herself, and how she's a different person now as a result. I loved her explanation of different women coming together, the different parts coming together, those women in Stay Road who had been through so much, and yet how the challah baking brought them all together, and how it brings us all together as women. That state of being that she spoke about, being as Jewish women, that connecting to our past, connecting to our traditions. There was so many different points there about challah that really inspire us to go ahead and go to our kitchen, roll up our sleeves, and dig right in, because challah is something that is a powerful thing for all of us. Thank you so much for watching. I'm curious to hear which part of this interview you resonated with you, which idea she left you, or which tip or trick you might be using in your own life. Thank you for watching. If you are not subscribed, please make sure that you are subscribed. Chabad.org/extraordinary. We're on all podcast platforms as well as on YouTube. And thank you for watching and being a part of this extraordinary community.